Hello and welcome to episode 58 of the official EstablishAndRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR. And with exactly 1 week to go until the NFL draft, which, by the way, will be announced live from Roger Goodell's basement, I am joined by the master of the mock draft, fellow ETR co-founder Evan Silva. Evan, what's going on?
What's up, man? Ready to talk some ball with you today. Talk some sports betting. Talk some draft props today. Next week we will have out a mock draft podcast where we're just going to run through every pick and talk about what we think each team is going to do at each first round selection. But yeah, let's jump into what we have on tap today.
Cool. Draft is close, man. Almost here, as I said, 1 week wait. If you listen to our previous 3 podcasts, read the articles we have on the site where everything is free, by the way, I think you're almost ready for the draft. And yeah, we've had a ton of stuff. Evan's done a ton of stuff. Karane's done a ton of stuff. I've done a few things, and we have all the podcasts. So I hope you guys are feeling satisfied with your draft content. Today, what we wanted to do is go over Evan's top 10s, which you can find on the site, where he has guys, why he has them there, what the consensus is. If you're looking, this is not about exactly where they will land. If you're looking for that kind of information, Evan has a mock draft out. He'll have an updated version out on Monday. But these are who, and this is what I'm most interested in. I'm actually not the most interested in mocks. I'm most interested in who smart people, football people who I think are good judges of talent and projectable NFL traits. I'm curious who they think are actually the best players. Like the mock draft stuff for me as a fantasy player, like, yeah, I get it. It's interesting. People like Evan compete to see who can have the most accurate mock draft. But I actually want to know who's good, not who the teams think are good and where they'll go. So with that in mind, let's start the wide receiver position. Evan's top 5 wide receivers in order: Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Henry Ruggs, Justin Jefferson, and 5th, Denzel Mims. We talked a lot about these guys with Josh Norris. I think some people are going to say, hey, Justin Jefferson is such a safe pick, incredible college production, no injuries, tested really well at the combine. And then we have questions on Henry Ruggs about his size. Josh Norris raised some concerns about consistency in Henry Ruggs' game. Do you think that the safety of Justin Jefferson is worth at least mentioning here when we talk about the top 4?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're spot on when you say that Justin Jefferson looks like a player with a very high floor. We did not see him really stretch the field at LSU. He was primarily a slot receiver. 78% of his routes were run in the slot this past year. He went to the combine, he ran 4.43. So I think that eats some concerns about his speed. But I think that at the next level, he's going to be primarily an interior player, whereas I think that Henry Ruggs is going to be a player that primarily plays outside. Now, Henry Ruggs did play quite a bit in the slot. Tyreek Hill plays a lot in the slot. But I think that primarily Henry Ruggs is – they're just very different players. I think that Justin Jefferson is, an exceptional possession receiver prospect, and Henry Ruggs is the kind of player that is going to make other players on the field better, even when he doesn't have the ball, because he's going to change coverage. I don't think that Justin Jefferson is going to change coverage in the NFL, but I do think that Justin Jefferson probably, depending on where these guys land, but I think Justin Jefferson will probably be the more productive player, better in fantasy, more of like the Chris Godwin role, and then Henry Ruggs will be a little bit more inconsistent because he's going to rely a lot on splash plays.
Sure. There's been a lot of debate between CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy at the top. You have Jerry Jeudy above CeeDee Lamb. Do you think there's a big gap there, and why Jeudy over Lamb?
I think that there was at one point in the draft process, I thought that there was a big gap, but I don't think that there is a big gap anymore. Just the more that I've watched the players, more that I've just learned about the players, I think that they're both top 15. I think they're both going to be top 15 picks for sure. I think they're going to be drafted in the same range. I like Jeudy better because he is a more natural separator, and also that Oklahoma offense. They produce some big time NFL players. Mark Andrews comes out of there. The two backs, Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. But I do think that production can be exaggerated a little bit in that Oklahoma offense. They play no defense. Oklahoma does not have a good defense. They play really weak defenses in the Big 12, and we've
Mhm.
seen Jerry Jeudy succeed in the SEC. So I think the level of competition comes into play a little bit, but I just think that Jerry Jeudy is a dominant separator, and I love that about him. I think that he's going to be able to get open consistently in the NFL. We saw him win on the outside and in the slot at Alabama. He primarily played slot this past year, but he did play a lot on the outside, and he got open, like wide open, pretty consistently on the outside. So just that separation ability, I think he has really unique ability to get open.
In this next tier here, some people are going to have T. Higgins. Some people are going to have KJ Hamler. Some people might even have, I don't know, Brian Edwards. You have in the next tier here Denzel Mims, Brandon Ayuk, Michael Pittman, Jalen Rieger, Chase Claypool, Laviska Shenault. Do you see Higgins and Hamler being close to that tier? And do you have favorites out of that kind of secondary tier behind Judy, Lamb, Ruggs, Jefferson?
I kind of do not think that Higgins out of Clemson and Hamler out of Penn State belong in that tier. I think that that tier of Ayuk and Denzel Mims uh,
Pittman.
and Pittman to a lesser extent, but and Rieger, I think that those guys are like first round caliber players. I don't think that Pittman's
Mhm.
going to go in the first round, but I think that Rieger absolutely could. I think that Ayuk absolutely could, depending on what happens with this core muscle surgery. I think that Mims belongs in the first round, but there seem to be really divided opinions on him. But I think that those guys are all like, they, and I think that in a normal wide receiver year, Michael Pittman would be a potential first round pick. I don't think that Higgins is going in the first round. I think he goes around the second, third kind of turn as
Yeah.
well in fantasy, but on day two, in the middle of day two. And then KJ Hamler just does not catch the ball consistently enough, I don't think, to belong in that same class. And T. Higgins, while he did get open at Clemson, I wonder if he's going to be athletic to get enough to do what he did. I mean, he was a vertical receiver at Clemson, and you don't see a whole lot of vertical receivers in the NFL that are running, mid 4.5s. Um,
Yeah.
and he's a build-up speed guy, and he's not particularly quick in a short area. So I wonder if his skill is going to translate.
Yep. Um, we talked about the limitations of T. Higgins. That was a 4.55 at his pro day, which is scary if you would have gotten
Right.
him at the combine. And yeah, KJ Hamler's size is a major concern for me. We got a question from Bolt's Chief. He said, "Do you see Antonio Gibson as being the steal of the draft?" You do not have Antonio Gibson in your top 10. You did mention Antonio Gibson, I believe, around 14 or 15 in your wide receiver rankings. Bolt's Chief wants to know, do you see Antonio Gibson as being the steal of the draft? A lot of buzz on Antonio Gibson these days.
I mean, again, he had 77 touches in his college career. 77. That's nothing, and half of them were carries. So the sample size is really, really small. What we know about, and that's why he's going to go on day 3. I think, I don't know, there's a possibility that he could sneak into the third round, I think. But I think in all likelihood, he's going to be a 4th or 5th round pick just because the sample size of him with the ball is so small. He was outstanding in the return game at Memphis, though. Kind of like Tony Pollard before him, coming out of the same college. But 6 foot, 228 pounds, a freak athlete, but still, that sample size is so small. I think he could be a steal. I think he could be a total dud. Production matters. When we're trying to forecast players, and he didn't have a whole lot because he just didn't get a lot of opportunity.
By the way, T. Higgins draft slot prop has really gotten a lot of juice on it, but they opened it so low. I think it was like 30 and a half or 31 and a half. And so I think Evan and I agree that T. Higgins is likely to go later than that. I didn't include that prop in my props article because I hate laying that much juice on something that we don't have good information on. But yeah, I think T. Higgins is very likely to go second or third round, not first round where the prop is right now. And we're going to talk about props a bunch here and take some listener questions at the end of the show. We can help talk more about that kind of stuff. Let's move to running back rankings. Evan has DeAndre Swift, number 1, followed by Jonathan Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, Zach Moss, Keyshawn Vaughn, Eno Benjamin, Josh Kelly, Darrington Evans are his top 10. And this is weird, Evan. I mean, I've seen you respect Dane Brugler, right? I mean, I think Dane Brugler is a pretty
Oh
sharp
yeah.
guy when it comes to, and he has J.K. Dobbins as his RB1. And
Yep.
I've seen other people have Edwards-Helaire as their RB1. And then all of fantasy Twitter loves Jonathan Taylor. And then the NFL seems to love DeAndre Smith. So one thing about this running back class is like it's hard to go wrong, I think. Nobody's going to laugh at you for having any of these top 4 guys on top. Why DeAndre Swift on top for you?
The versatility. The versatility. I think that there are 4 running backs, and you just mentioned them all, that are in their own tier. And I think that they are all going to go, I don't know, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I still think could fall just because people are going to, look at the sheet and he's 5'7" and he runs 4.6 flat. And,
Yeah.
they're going to be like, we can't take him in the second round. I think that some people will think like that in the NFL. But I think that there is a tier, and it's Jonathan Taylor, it's DeAndre Swift, it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and it's J.K. Dobbins. And I think to some extent they are interchangeable. The reason that I have J.K. Dobbins number 4 among those 4 is because he's like a smaller workhorse. And I think that can be a little dangerous. Like I'd like him a lot better if he was like 217 or, 222, but he's 209. That's pretty small for like a grinder back who flourished on volume in college. I mean, his final season, he averaged 21 and a half carries per game, just carries. And over his final 4 games, his touch totals were 37, 33, 33, and 24. I mean, he was just a monster workhorse, and he's on the small side to be able to do that in the NFL.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we talked about DeAndre Swift. I thought I was probably going to go with Jonathan Taylor as my number 1 back, but in a previous podcast, you kind of convinced me that, you were like, why don't we have DeAndre Swift number 1? Because his versatility, I think, gives him that edge over Jonathan Taylor. We had Renner on, and he talked about how Jonathan Taylor had 8 drops on 50 catchable targets in his college career. That's not a good stat. And Jonathan Taylor only had the 1 year of receiving production, and and he doesn't have a whole lot of pass blocking experience either. I mean, I think that DeAndre Swift is the stronger play at this point.
Sure. So my point on DeAndre Swift would be you want your offense to lean towards the pass, right? It's more efficient. Yep. So if you draft DeAndre Swift, you feel good about calling more pass plays because he plays so well in the pass game. If you draft Jonathan Taylor, even if he's okay in the pass game, you still feel like we got to put it in his gut. We got to run between the tackles with him, and that's just an inefficient way to play. So, I think just from a stylistic standpoint, I'd rather have the back, if it's at all close with running, I'd rather have the back who's better in the pass game, obviously. And we'll talk about some running back props here because I think due to the uncertainty and where it is all over the place, there's some value in trying to figure out where teams are at with the running backs. I want to bring up Cam Akers for a second. I saw a comp on Cam Akers. It might have been Dane or somebody called him a souped-up Duke Johnson. I don't know if you saw that in Cam Akers, but I think he's in this like tier after the top 4. For most people, he's like the clear-cut number 5 RB in this class, and you can probably get him in round 3, maybe even later. What do you think about Cam Akers and that Duke Johnson comp?
That's not necessarily how I saw Cam Akers, because when I think of Duke Johnson, I think of a guy who has been stereotyped as a passing down back only in the NFL, and I don't think that Cam Akers is going to be stereotyped like that. I mean, this guy had almost 600 carries in his college career, 87th percentile speed score, ran 4.47, 217 pounds, 69 career catches. He was an excellent after contact runner at Florida State, which had one of the worst offensive lines in the nation. And he was just a post contact producer. And that is a skill that translates really well to the NFL, as does passing game ability, and he's got that. I mean, 7 career receiving touchdowns, again, almost 70 catches in his 3-year career at Florida State. I think that I don't think that he's going to get typecast as a passing down only niche player Duke Johnson has in the NFL. I thought it was interesting in Gil Brandt's Hot 150, which he released early this week. He had Cam Akers buried in like player number 105 or something. I mean, he had him really, really low, and that often can be an indication of where the player is going to be drafted. And I mean, I think that that's probably where Cam Akers belongs, really, within the context of the class. But that would make him a 4th-round pick.
Yeah.
And fourth round picks. I mean, there's no built-in allegiance of a team to any 4th-round pick.
Certainly. I think you have Keyshawn Vaughn maybe higher than most people. RB7, you have him in this class. Why don't you tell the people why you like Keyshawn Vaughn maybe more than the consensus?
Because he's pretty big. He's 5'10", 214. He ran 4.51, which is pretty good speed score. He can catch the ball. He had 66 career catches. He averaged almost 6 yards per career carry, or 6 yards per carry in his career in the SEC, playing behind a terrible Vanderbilt offensive line. So he checks the box of pretty well built, fast enough, good in the passing game enough, and really productive as a tackle breaker, and really productive against high end competition. So. I like Keyshawn Vaughn, and I hope that he lands in a spot where he can get some opportunity.
Any of these later ranked running backs you have on here that you think have a chance? I mean, my buddy Christian Harder he went to Maryland. He's from Maryland. He told me I need to know about Anthony McFarland. Anybody down there that sticks out to you?
Well, I think that this class is really, really top heavy, and just the fact that Cam Akers is the number 5 back here, and I think he's largely a consensus top 6 back in this class, and he is in the 100s in Gil Brandt's Hot 150. That kind of goes to show you that it's not a real deep running back class. Like Darrington Evans, he's another guy with serious speed, 4.41. He's on the smaller side at 203 pounds, but he was hyper productive at Appalachian State. He played in the return game there. He had a kickoff return touchdown each of the past 3 years. All he's lacking is size. I did a podcast with JJ Zacharyson at Late Round QB. He compared him to Nyheim Hines. I think that Darrington Evans is better than Nyheim Hines, but I think that he could become a player like that. I think you could check out the rest of the rankings and decide for yourself. But I also like Eno Benjamin, who is a shorter guy at 5'9", 207, but he had a sub 7-second 3-cone. He ran 4.57. That's fine. He's a 72nd percentile athlete. He can catch the ball. 77 receptions over his final 2 years in college. He's on the small side, but he can catch the ball, and he's really, really tough. He's a really competitive runner.
All right. Let's go to quarterbacks, where the story of the week in the draft has been the injury flags being raised on Tua. And I almost feel bad for the guy because, under normal circumstances, he'd go through, rigorous full medical testing. It seems to me like the teams, which is crazy to me, but the teams feel like they can't get enough medical testing on Tua. I mean, with such a big investment coming up, you would think that they could get, some type of corona test done on a doctor and done on Tua and have doctors check him out. But he released a pro day video, which I thought he was moving, to my untrained eye, looked like he was moving okay. But now, I mean, all the buzz, you can see it in the prop market too, which we'll talk about in a second. All the buzz is that Justin Herbert is going to go ahead of Tua. And I think people maybe don't realize how good of an athlete Justin Herbert is. He's no stiff, man. 6'6", 236, 4.6 speed, 35-inch vertical is serious for a quarterback. Do you think that Tua's injury concerns are enough? Obviously you don't, because you still have Tua second overall, but do you at least understand why a lot of people seem to be dropping Tua on their boards? And what do you think of all these latest rumors?
I mean, I'm buying him. I think that he's going to drop a little bit. I still think that he's going to go in the top 12. I can't even imagine the Raiders passing on him if he makes it to number 12. I think the Jaguars are, if you can find a prop bet where you can get some some pretty good odds on the Jaguars going for Tua, or Tua landing with the Jags. I think that would be pretty interesting. I think that he could fall to number 9, and I also think that they could trade up for Tua. They have 4 top 75 picks. They have 2 first rounders. They're at 9 and they're at 20. So, hey, if he gets past the Chargers, I think the Jaguars are very, very, very much in play to go grab him, or even for Tua to fall to them at number 9. Gardner Minshew was, he had a really nice season for a 6th-round pick, but there's a reason that he went in the 6th round, and he's probably not a franchise quarterback, and they should know that.
Yeah.
I am buying Herbert going ahead of Tua in the draft, and I think the Dolphins really, really like Justin Herbert.
Okay, but you have Tua above Herbert, and that includes the injury concerns. You think Tua will end up having the better NFL career? I've seen a lot of people, we had Josh Norris on. He says, look, Tua's a better player than Herbert. Let's not overthink this with the injury concerns. Right. And other people say Tua's 6 feet tall. He's had a ton of injury woes already in his career. Justin Herbert is safer. I'm not sure what I think there, but man, if there's a big gap, if there's a big gap in your talent evaluation, I would probably stick with Tua and hope it works out on the injury case.
I agree.
But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
No, I completely agree with that. I just think the Tua is better. So the thing is that so many decision makers in the NFL they don't think about, who can take us to the top necessarily. A lot of them think, who can put me in a position where I can keep my job,
Yeah.
Climbing to the mountaintop is not necessarily the number one priority for all these guys. A lot of times their priority is just, how can I remain the GM of this team, making millions of dollars and having this great it's a lot of clout comes with being the GM of an NFL team. So think about job preservation and not necessarily how can I get to the mountaintop. I think that you can get to the mountaintop potentially with Tua, and I think that Justin Herbert might be the guy who just allows you to maintain your job security.
Yep. You have Jalen Hurts ahead of Jordan Love, and we talked plenty already about Jalen Hurts' fantasy potential. From real life, though, I think a lot of people are going to tell you that Jordan Love is a better prospect from real football, not fantasy. But anyways, you have Hurts 4, Love 5 from 6. Tell people about your thinking there a little bit with that tier after Tua and Herbert.
Yeah, so this is an interesting tier. I'm starting to think that Jordan Love might fall out of the 1st round. There's a range that makes sense for him, beginning with 19 and the Raiders, going all the way to the Packers at number 30. The Saints are in there at 24. The Patriots are in there at 23. The Jaguars are in there at 20. So I think that if he does go in the 1st round, there are teams that you can connect him with. But the reason that I went with Jalen Hurts over Jordan Love is because I think that they both have work to do as passers, but Jalen Hurts is a much more dynamic runner. He's faster, and he was way more productive as a runner in college than was Jordan Love. Jordan Love only had 9 rushing touchdowns, 0 rushing touchdowns in his final season. And Jalen Hurts was he had 43 rushing touchdowns in his college career. Average over 5 yards per carry. So I think that, again, they're both kind of developmental as passers, and they may never be particularly accurate passers, but that rushing value can carry a quarterback. We've seen it with Josh Allen. A lot of players to begin their career, you just relying on your legs as, Lamar Jackson in his 1st season, now he took a huge step in his 2nd year, but he relied a lot on his legs just to kind of, string him along early in his career while he developed as a passer. And I think that Jalen Hurts just gives you a lot more dynamic athleticism, and he has that true rushing ability that can carry him early in his career while he develops as a passer.
All right, let's talk about some props, because I know everybody is itching to make some bets that we think are plus EV. I want to spend a minute here talking about draft props in general. So I feel much better about player props that we do during the season. If you guys were subscribers to Establish the Run, did really well betting player props during the season and kind of sharing what I did. The reason that I find that a better bet is because it's decided on the field, and nobody knows the answer. Whereas, I mean, somebody knows the answer to these draft props, like the Dolphins GM knows what he's thinking he's going to do if he has Tua or Herbert ahead on his board, so somebody out there might know. And, it's just totally different. It's not about projecting players. It's about really just finding information. So the way I think to print money in this is to try to get the information before the books move the line, take the lines down. And the Tua thing that we talked about is a perfect example. Earlier in the week, like a week ago, when people started tweeting and talking about how Tua was falling on boards, you could get Tua plus 250 to be the third quarterback off the board. Now it's like you can only get plus 105 or so on Tua to be the third quarterback off the board. So just finding information. And at some point, Schefter or Rap Sheet or one of these guys, tweets information that it's very clear they know who a guy is going to take. And there's ways to profit off that. So that would be the stone lock, wait for that stuff, easy way. The speculation way, which obviously has less projected ROI, is just to speculate on things that we think. So we're going to talk about some of those now. The article that I put on the site is about that kind of stuff. And we'll start with no running back drafted in round 1. You can get that plus 230 at William Hill Books as of Friday. What's today? Friday afternoon. So, I think the league is starting to understand that taking running back in the first round is definitely not something that is going to be plus EV. Last year, Josh Jacobs was the only running back to go in the first round, and that was by, archaic John Gruden. I think we saw guys like Sony Michel and Rashad Penny go in the first round, and their teams lived to regret it. The other thing about no running back going in the first round this year is, as I already mentioned, like there's no consensus. There's no standout. DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, different people think that each one of them is the RB1, and I think there's a pretty thick tier there. You could even add Cam Akers and maybe Zach Moss into that tier, and then that starts to push all those guys down. So, I don't know. I think it's around 50-50 if a running back goes in round 1, but you can get plus 230. So I know Evan likes that one also. Evan, do you think you'll have a running back going in the first round of your new mock when it comes out on Monday?
No. I mean, the teams at the end of the first round, it's like every year the mock drafts want to give the Dolphins a running back in the first round. And they have number 26, which they got from the Texans. And they're an analytically run organization right now, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that they would do that. I think that if they're going to draft a running back, I think it would be really late. They have like 14 picks. I mean, you do not need to force a first round running back when you have 14 picks. And then some people give the Chiefs at number 32 a running back in their mock drafts. And I just think that Andy Reid is too smart for that. He's going to look at, the production they got from Damian Williams. They just signed DeAndre Washington. They're going to be fine with those guys. Those guys are going to be good, for them.
Yeah.
So I'm almost certainly not going to have a running back in my final mock.
Yeah. So to get plus 230 on that, I think is really good value, even if we think that it's roughly 50-50. Next one that I wanted to mention was Justin Jefferson's draft slot, currently 21.5. And at some of the books, like on FanDuel, to get under 21.5, you have to lay minus 156. I mean, so important to shop around. On William Hill, you can get under 21.5 minus 110 on Justin Jefferson's draft slot. And, there's a lot of teams who I think can take, even though the Cardinals traded for DeAndre Hopkins, I think the Cardinals are still in play to take a wide receiver. The Jets certainly are. The Raiders have 2 picks in the first 22 picks. The 49ers, the Broncos, the Eagles. I mean, there's a lot of them. And I'd be shocked if any team has Justin Jefferson lower than wide receiver 4 on their board. And I bet a lot due to safety, things that we talked about, have him higher. So I think Justin Jefferson will go in the first 21 picks of the draft. I don't remember where you had him in your first mock, but where are you thinking for reasonable landing spots for Justin Jefferson?
It scares me a little bit because I think that Ruggs, Lamb, and Judy are going to occupy a lot of that, like those wide receiver needy teams that you mentioned. And from 9 to 16, Jaguars are in there. Broncos are in there at 15. The Jets at 11, although I think that they need to be locked into an offensive tackle. And then with the Raiders at 12, like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of wide receiver needy teams in there. But I think that a lot of that's going to be occupied by Judy, Lamb, and Ruggs. And then I think that Jefferson is the fourth guy. I wish that you could get number 22 in there too,
Right.
because the Vikings are
Right.
definitely a candidate to take a receiver. You are getting the Eagles in there. It would not be crazy at all if the Jags took him at 20. I
Mm-hmm.
say that Daniel Jeremiah had a recent mock where Justin Jefferson did go number 20 to the Jags. But I also could see him going, anywhere in the 20s, and even like to the Packers at 30. Again, he was primarily a possession receiver this past season at LSU. That's when you watch him play on tape. That's where he's playing. He's playing a possession receiver role, and that worries me a little bit. And just like our team's going to be like, we can wait on a receiver because there are 18 in our top 100.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah, so that could work against some of the receivers, not just Justin Jefferson, any of the receivers. But yeah, I mean, I think that 20 and 21, 20 to the Jags, 21 to the Eagles. I think that's sort of your sweet spot if you're making that bet.
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything you're saying. And for that reason, I do want to be over on most draft position bets on wide receivers because I do think that, to Evan's point, that teams are going to say, hey, I can wait and get a ridiculous player in the second or third round or even the fourth round, maybe. One thing about this bet for me is I actually think that a reasonable amount of teams will have Jefferson over Ruggs on their draft board. Like, I don't think it's crazy for Jefferson to go ahead of Ruggs. We might think it's crazy. Fantasy Twitter might think it's crazy, but I don't think NFL teams who are, as Evan already mentioned, are playing for safety a lot, are going to think that it's crazy to have Jefferson over Ruggs. So that one would not
And
shock
I
me.
think that playing for safety is going to be especially pronounced this year.
Yeah.
Trying to hit singles and doubles and not trying to hit home runs. I think that a lot of teams are going to take that approach. And Justin Jefferson is just like a damn good football player,
Right.
and they can feel really good about turning in that pick.
Yep. Okay. Next one, I want to talk about the running backs, and I've mentioned this a few times already. How there is not a clear cut RB1 in this class, but DeAndre Swift is priced as such. I mean, DeAndre Swift is minus 200 at most books to be the first running back off the board. And I think that's reasonable, but I think that the true odds are way lower than that. So I think there's value on Jonathan Taylor. You can get plus 200 on Canby books. Canby is the odds making service behind DraftKings and a lot of other books around the country. So on DraftKings, Jonathan Taylor, first running back drafted plus 200. And then also on DraftKings, you can get Clyde Edwards-Helaire, first running back drafted, which I don't think will happen, but plus 2,000, 20 to 1 on Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be the first running back off the board. And that implies around a 4% chance. I think there's better than a 4% chance that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the first running back off the board, even though it's not likely. But yeah, I mean, I think the Jonathan Taylor bet, I mean, teams just, I think somebody said, it may have been you, like the profile that Jonathan Taylor has is very similar to profiles that other backs have gone in like the top 5 have had, like incredible college production, incredible combine, big guy, So to get 2 to 1 on Jonathan Taylor to go ahead of DeAndre Swift, I think is pretty good value. What do you think about that?
I think it's awesome. I bet it on Bovada last night, so let's hope we win.
Let's win that one. Okay. First tight end drafted. And this one is interesting because I know everybody just has Cole Kmet as just absolutely locked in. And he's around minus 400 at most books to be the first tight end drafted. But I've seen some weird things, man. I have seen in Peter Schrager's latest mock draft, he has Harrison Bryant not only being the first tight end drafted, but a first round tight end, Harrison Bryant. And I know Evan classified him as more of like a fullback H-back type, but you can get plus 1,600 on William Hill, 16 to 1 on Harrison Bryant to be the first tight end. And then also we've talked about Adam Troutman, who I think, small school, but you can get 9 to 1 on him to be the first tight end taken. So how strong do you feel that Cole Kmet will actually be the first tight end off the board? Because if you think there's a chance that he's not, there's some really good options.
Not strong at all. Not strong at all. And Gil Brandt had Albert O.
Mm-hmm.
say his last name, and it's gonna be. I'm already thinking of like writing the matchup column and writing his freaking name. Um, you know, Gil Brandt had him as number 39 overall player. So yeah, I mean, and I think you could bet multiple
Yeah.
of those guys to be the first tight end drafted, and it makes plenty of sense because you're getting them at such long odds, and none of them are bad bets. I think Albert O, Troutman, has a good history of mock drafting.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. I think that Harrison Bryant is going to go in the third round. And I think he's more of like a Kyle Juszczyk sort of player. Lance Zierlein has compared him to like Frank Wycheck. He's like an H-back, but that's interesting that Schrager put him in the first round. I didn't know that. And Schrager has a really good history of mock drafting. Like among the truly mainstream writers, he's like right up there with Jeremiah.
Yep. Okay, a few more here that Evan mentioned to me. Isaiah Simmons draft slot 6.5. Isaiah Simmons, if you watched I'm not a big college football guy, but if you watched Clemson play at all, I mean, dude was all over the field. Like the announcers were like drooling all over him. I mean, they were like fully aroused about Isaiah Simmons. However, you like Isaiah Simmons over 6.5 draft slot. You can get that at plus 110 offshore right now, I believe. Talk to me about Isaiah Simmons and where you think he'll go.
Yeah, initially I thought that Isaiah Simmons would be in the mix to go number 4 overall to the Giants. I think there's almost no chance of that happening now. I definitely do not think the Dolphins will take him at 5. I think he could go at number 6 to the Chargers. I think that, but otherwise you're winning the bet. You're winning the bet if he goes to the Panthers. I think I was finishing up a mock that I'm going to try to put out by Sunday night or Monday morning. And I mean, I could see a situation where Simmons falls like into the teens. So I think that those early forecasts of him going to the Giants, that's not going to happen. The Giants are going to take an offensive tackle. I think that's almost a certainty. And after Isaiah Simmons falls past the Giants, like he's going to fall. He's going to fall at least a few spots. I could see him going to the Panthers at number 7. They lost Luke Kuechly. He jumps right into that middle linebacker role. But you win the bet if he goes to the Panthers.
Sure. Yeah. I think the one thing about projecting for teams is we need to be aware of trades, right? Like I think there's, reasonable chances that there's going to be, plenty of trades in the top 10. And so trying to project those out would lead you maybe on a different path. But yeah, I mean, plus 110 on Isaiah Simmons over 6.5 certainly sounds strong to me. Another one that you mentioned that I thought was interesting was Andrew Thomas to be the first offensive lineman drafted. And this one, I would shop around. I think you might be able to get as strong as 8 or 9 to 1. I would have to check. But Andrew Thomas is someone that I know people have commented is pro ready. And in this kind of Corona environment, there may be extra value to that. But not many people think Andrew Thomas will be the first offensive lineman drafted. What do you think about the chances of that?
Yeah, so I took it at plus 550, 5.5 to 1. But I don't think that he's going to be the first offensive tackle drafted. Also know that what I think, isn't always what's going to happen. I think that Jedrick Wills, actually, out of Alabama, is going to be the first tackle drafted. I think he's going to go number 4 overall to the Giants. But Andrew Thomas, like if you read Bob McGinn's NFL draft preview series, which is just fantastic in The Athletic, he used to do it for years and years at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He polled 17 NFL executives and scouts around the league. And he does like this voting system. And in the voting system, Andrew Thomas came out as the number 1 tackle in the draft, rated by the scouts and executives. And that's not necessarily indicative of where he's going to go, but I just thought at plus 550, like, why not?
Well, and you can get better than plus 550 too if you shop around some. So yeah, I think that's at least interesting. Speaking of long odds, Derrick Brown to be the 3rd overall pick. I think you get 8 to 1 offshore. I'm not sure where you can get in regulated, markets right now. But yeah, we haven't talked much about Derrick Brown at all. We actually got a listener question. People were interested where it must have been like an Auburn guy or something. Where Derrick Brown's going to go.
Yeah, well, I think that the Lions at number 3 overall, I mean, I think that Derrick Brown is like a sleeper to go there. First of all, this is a player where there's a massive disconnect between the like media draft analysts and the actual NFL teams. Because if you look at guys that are really tuned into the NFL, worked in the NFL, are friends with guys in the NFL, they have Derrick Brown way up high, whereas like PFF has him like a middle of the first round player. But he's number 2 in Tony Pauline's rankings, like the number 2 overall player. I think he's like number 6 in Dane Brugler's rankings. Jeremiah and Gil Brandt both have him super, super high. So I think that he's going to go earlier than a lot of people kind of in the media draft analysis sector believe that he should. And I think that the Lions don't make great decisions historically. Number one, number two, they have nothing at defensive tackle right now. Their top interior defensive lineman is Danny Shelton. And they have Desmond Trufant and Justin Coleman at corner, and they have this dude that they got out of Penn State in the 5th round who made some starts last year. I cannot say his name, like Ameni Oruye or something like that. But he was like a height, weight, speed freak, typical Penn State. But he did make some starts as a rookie. So they do have some dudes, in the secondary. They have nothing on the interior defensive line, and I think that Derrick Brown is going to go really early in the draft. Everyone is giving them Jeff Okudah. We know that. I probably will have Jeff Okudah to them in my final mock draft. But I think that if I was going to pick who is the second likeliest guy to go to the Lions, it would be Derrick Brown, and you can get him at some really friendly odds.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of rumors about Detroit maybe trading down too, which is something to be aware of as well. One thing I wanted to mention, and I mentioned this a bunch, you can read it in the props article, just about due to lack of pro day, due to incomplete medical testing, due to incomplete athletic testing, and due to really reporters not being at workouts and not having access to their sources as much. I think there's going to be more quote unquote surprises, meaning people's mock drafts getting blown up and stuff like that than there ever has been before. And I think we can embrace that in the prop market, which is why I mentioned some of those super long shots about, Adam Troutman and Harrison Bryant and Edwards-Helaire, like, embracing the variance and being anti-fragile and being like, if everything gets completely blown up, how can we profit? And I think one way, Evan, we talked about before the show, it was like, Dallas plus 275 to take an offensive player. Everybody assumes they're going to take a defensive player, but, I don't think that anybody knows for sure. Plus 275 certainly seems like a price where Dallas could take an offensive player.
I think they could take a center. At number 17, Cesar Ruiz is a stud prospect out of Michigan, and there's like a gap between him and the next center, and they just had Travis Frederick retire. I mean, I think the Cowboys could definitely take Cesar Ruiz, and you're getting that at almost plus 300, like tripling your money. So there's a lot of options for that on Bovada. Just to go pick, will the Chargers take an offensive player or a defensive player in the first round? You get
for sure. Okay. Before we wrap up here, I want to hit some listener questions quickly. Appreciate all you guys sending in questions. First one comes from Rando0. He says, do we think the 49ers need a wide receiver at 13? You've been very high on Deebo Samuel in the fantasy process. How much of a priority do you think wide receiver is for the 49ers with that number 13 overall pick?
I mean, the question is, do they need a wide receiver at number 13? I think the answer to that is no. Due largely to the fact that there's just so much depth in this class. But they don't have a lot of picks. They do have 2 first-rounders. The rumor is that they want to stay at 13 and they want to trade down out of number 31 to pick up more picks. And that indicates to me that they want to sit tight and take one of these receivers. because that's the range where these stud receivers are going to go, whether it be Ruggs, Lamb, or Judy. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I think there's a pretty good chance that they take a receiver at 13, but I would say no, they don't need to take a receiver at number 13. They could also take Javon Kinlaw out of South Carolina, I think, to kind of help replace DeForest Buckner.
Yeah, and we've talked about the injury concerns, but Jalen Hurd, I think we're both high on his talent. Hopefully he comes back and plays well. And then they kind of, I don't know what happened. They just left Dante Pettis for dead. I believe he's still on the roster, but I mean, they just completely gave up on him. So, I think they have some options there if they don't take wide receiver at 13. So certainly don't think it's a need. Next question comes from a friend of the show, Jared Ludman. Hope all is well, buddy. Jared says, Evan has the Vikings taking Denzel Mims at number 22. Why does he think Mims will be a better fit for Minnesota than Jefferson, Rieger, Ayuk, Pittman, etc.?
I think that Jefferson is kind of like Adam Thielen. So I think that if you were looking for a wide receiver who complements Adam Thielen with a different playing style, and I see Denzel Mims as, on the Kenny Galladay, AJ Green, big, tall, long, deep threat, who can win in the intermediate and deep areas. That's how I envision Denzel Mims, whereas I think that Justin Jefferson is a lot like Adam Thielen. I don't think that that's a bad thing, but they run a lot of play action in Minnesota, and they need a deep receiver to pull that off. And I think that Denzel Mims fits that best. And Gary Kubiak, their OC, I think could see some Andre Johnson in Denzel Mims's game. I mean, Denzel Mims is an incredible prospect. Rieger, I also think would fit him. He's just like a smaller version of that, of that deep threat. Ayuk, I think, is more like a Chris Godwin style of player and a little bit like Thielen to some extent. And then Pittman, I just don't think is going to go in the first round. But the Vikings need receivers. Like if the season started today, who would be their number 2? BC Johnson. Like they could probably take 2 receivers. Like within the first 4 rounds.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. Question 3 comes from MBW87. Says, ask Evan if I can officially abandon my Panthers fandom if we take anything other than a defensive player at 7. Thank you. Can he just give up on the Panthers if they go offense at number 7?
I mean, this offense is going to be fun, man. I mean,
yeah.
And I mean, if they take an offensive lineman, I don't think that would be the worst thing in the world. I think they're going to take a defensive player, though. I think that there's a small chance that Okudah could fall to them at number 7. I think Isaiah Simmons, again, very much in play. Derrick Brown, if he makes it there. I think that they probably, in all likelihood, end up with a defensive player, but be excited about this offense. I'm a little excited about the new coaching staff there. I really, really love what I saw from Joe Brady, their offensive coordinator at LSU. And they're going to lose a lot of games, but they're going to lose games like 35-27. I think.
Can't wait. From Jake Mason, another friend of the show, he says, who is a candidate to be this year's DJ Chark? A guy that broke out that not many people talked about in the preseason last year. And when I think of DJ Chark, I think of like a really good size speed prospect, really good measurables, and a guy who was entering his second year that not a lot of people were talking about. And to me, a candidate would be N'Keal Harry. N'Keal Harry was a really good prospect coming out, had injury concerns, couldn't get on the same page with Tom Brady. They tried to replace him with Antonio Brown, with Josh Gordon, etc. Just never clicked for N'Keal Harry. But now, he's been on the backup squad with Jarrett Stidham. If Stidham ends up starting, you could see more chemistry. And I know Pat Crane mentioned that as well. So, yeah, I don't have a great answer for who can be this year's DJ Chark. But in terms of second-year players with really good measurables who have a chance, I think N'Keal Harry certainly fits the bill. I don't know if you had a chance to think about this one at all, Evan.
No, I like that pick. I haven't thought about it, but I do like that pick.
Cool.
I'll just stick with your pick.
Cool. We're doubling down on N'Keal Harry. Okay. Elmer Helmet. This guy once asked me how much I would take to eat a
This
Pube
guy won
sandwich.
the Millie last year.
Yeah.
This guy won the Millie.
Yeah. He said, tell us about the quote unquote Gil Brandt effect. And by the way, people should know who Gil Brandt is. Some people might not. Gil Brandt's like 90, but he's like like chilling with like young models when he like got into the Hall of Fame, and he's like releasing the Hot 150. I mean, when I say he's like 90, like I might not be exaggerating. He's super, super old, but he's still like really big in the scouting community. So, anyways, the question is, once Gil released his top 150, how much did you reassess your rankings, and what percent of NFL teams take heed to the Godfather's wisdom? Do you think a bunch of teams pulled out a bunch of Kentucky tape after seeing Lynn Bowden at 44? So I guess the question is, how
No,
much of effect do you think Gilbrand has?
I don't think that that's the kind of effect that he has. I think that when he releases his top 150, you look for guys like Lynn Bowden who are kind of outliers as compared to where they are generally regarded, amongst the media. So Lynn Bowden out of Kentucky, who his game is very similar to Randall Cobb, who also played at Kentucky. Him being ranked number 44 overall when he's generally considered, I don't know, maybe in the 90s. That really stood out. The Albert O out of Mizzou, the tight end, him being at number 39, that really, really stood out. Cam Akers, I mentioned, him being like, 105, that stood out. That was a little bit lower than I expected. But yeah, I mean, I, I think it's really interesting to read. I don't think that it influences NFL teams. I think that it is influenced by NFL teams, and it's largely a product of not only what Gilbrandt himself thinks or the people that work under him think, but what he's actually hearing from people around the league.
All right, last question we're going to do today comes from Steve Poland. He says, which picks in Evan's mock does he feel most certain of happening based on his intel? Is there any picks or spots that you think, Evan, you feel really good about? Obviously, everybody feels good about Joe Burrow going number one to the Bengals. I think the Redskins almost basically came out and
Yeah.
said they're going to take Chase Young second overall. Is there anything beyond that you feel really good about? You mentioned offensive
I
tackle to the
mean,
Giants.
yes, yes. And I don't feel good about the identity of that player yet, but I feel very good about the Giants taking an offensive tackle at number 4.
Yeah.
Um, Other than that, though, man, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I know what's going to happen. Like, this is one of the things that makes the NFL draft so great is its unpredictability. And this is going to be the least predictable draft. Like, my mock is going to suck this year. I already know that. Um, I mean, because it's going to be a crazy year, and things like people think that they have things figured out before the draft. This is, but they don't. Like, people do not know what's going to happen. People inside the league do not know what's going to happen. There hasn't been there hasn't been even remotely as much communication between the teams this offseason because everyone's at home.
Yeah.
I mean, they could talk to people on the phone, but there's nothing like going to a pro day and every team sends 5 representatives and they're all talking, for hours and hours, and they're talking to the coaches, at the college, and they're talking to the players. Like, that is a huge, huge source of intel amongst people in the league and also, for reporters. So I just think that, we sort of have senses of where guys are going to go, but that's going to get blown up probably as soon as the number 3 overall pick, whether that gets traded or the Lions take, Derrick Brown, or, maybe they surprise everyone and take a quarterback. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I do feel like I know Joe Burrow 1, Chase Young 2, Giants are taking a tackle at 4, and that's like about it.
All right. Well, it should be fun, man. I'm actually looking forward
Yeah.
to the draft a lot. Basically, mostly because I've barely, besides Bale's push-up bet, I've barely been gambling at all. So, this is like the longest I've gone in my entire life without, in the last 20 years without gambling. So yeah, I'm looking forward to, looking forward to Thursday night. We'll be back next week with the mock draft podcast. Evan will have his mock draft up. In the meantime, you can check out everything we have on the site: Corain, Sleepers, Evan's top 10 rankings, mock draft. I have article about thresholds, about the draft props. Everything is free on the site right now. So head to establishedrun.com. So for Evan, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.